site is currently designated with a general plan development district designation in the comprehensive zoning ordinance, which has allows for a variety of uses, including commercial and industrial, but subject to some restrictions, including leaving as much as possible of the natural area around the site.
But they would have to come forward with a plan to this commission.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Carly Frankic.
Hello, my name is Carly Frankic. I'm the port planner for the Port of New Orleans, 1350 Port of New Orleans Place. Thank you all for your time today. The Port of New Orleans team met with staff. We had a really productive conversation about our 3 applications to amend the future land use map. And we are determined to exhaust the administrative process to rectify the land use and zoning issues with their property. And while we have the greatest respect for staff and appreciate the intent of their recommendations, we must reiterate that the port has exclusive jurisdiction and control over its properties, as made by the state constitution and confirmed by statute. These recommendations, the city is interfering with that exclusive control. Legally, the city does not have the power to do that. Under the Constitution, only a 2/3 supermajority of the legislature can strip the powers of the port. The Constitution is expressly subordinates the city's home rule power to that of the port. There's also federal implications as well. The port is the Fed's local interest responsible for growing maritime commerce along the canals fronting the Paris and Aurora properties. Proposed amendments would prevent the port from carrying out that charge. Our mission is to drive economic prosperity by maximizing the flow of waterborne commerce. The Port of New Orleans is the greatest economic driver of the state, responsible for 1 in 5 jobs generated. Our salaries are 37% higher than the local average, and we spent $3.3 million with minority and women-owned businesses last year. In the 7 years since the City Planning Commission approved the master plan and the planned development area has been on this property, we've been unable to locate developers to develop it, and it's because of this land use issue. A 60% open space requirement is a problem for planners or for developers, as well as having to go through another layer of bureaucracy. Having a land use of industrial and zoning of maritime industrial lays out a clear and defined use and process for developing this property. The staff gave 2 reasons for recommending denial. And the first is that there's no history of industrial use on the property, which is inaccurate. It's been used for dredge spoils. Staff notes in its revised report that it does not have a defined use for this. Well, that's not a reason to deny it just because they haven't defined it. It's a use. The second is that it is necessary for redundant storm surge protection. Well, this is behind the lake-borne surge barrier, which is one of the largest storm barriers ever built, and it's located within the Orleans levee district. So if we want redundancy, we've got a storm surge barrier and a levee district. If those 2 fail, this 89% acre parcel with 60% open space isn't going to save the city. So that said,
Ms. Frankic, that is your time. But
okay.
I'm just going to ask you to bring it to a close.
Well, we just want to ask that you go back to the industrial land use and zoning that we had prior to the development of the city master plan.
Thank you. Commissioner Weedberg?
Quick question. Port does a great job. The crux of your petition and protest on this, is it the burden that it causes, or is it that you shouldn't have to go through this process because of being a state entity, or a little of both?
With all of the above?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we have the legal standing to have control of our property. We want to go through the legislative process, the administrative process, to work with the city. We have new administration at the Port of New Orleans, and we are trying our best to always work in partnership with the city to maximize the productivity of our assets and bring jobs and commerce to the city. So the problem with the planned development areas is many-fold. One, it does not allow for all the uses that are allowed in maritime industrial, particularly the manufacturing uses that would be most appropriate for this site. It's across the street from an energy plant. It's on the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, which sees 22,000 lockages through the canal lock every year. It's a very busy waterway. We've talked to 2 of the largest land-based developers in the area, the ones that did Jesuit Bend and the ones who did the Chef Mentor Pass Mitigation Bank. They both went out. They both did site visits of all of our property out there. Our property in the Golden Triangle, our property at Aurora, and our property at Paris. They're not interested in Paris and Aurora because they're within the surge barrier and behind the levee. They have no value as mitigation banks. So the fact that we're requiring 60% open space on a planned development area seems a bit silly because the city has a stormwater retention rule. So if it's about retaining water on the site, that's already built into the zoning. If it's about surge protection, it's ridiculous to think that this is going to save us if the surge barrier and the levee have failed. So there's many reasons why. There's the legal aspect, and then there's the practical aspect.
Okay.
That help?
It does, and I guess I don't think anyone characterized this as the make or break on the ability of the city to withstand a storm. I think along with everything else they recommend, it's part of a strategy. So I appreciate it, but I just wanted to step off that one just a little bit. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Scott Eustace.
Thank you very much, Scott Eustace, Coastal Wetland Specialist for Gulf Restoration Network. We're commenting in opposition of consideration of industrial zoning. Please keep these over 200 acres of wetlands wet. Both the Paris and Aurora properties work as stormwater infrastructure around an area that is it's heavily subsiding. It has some of the biggest subsidence in the parish due to the existing industrial uses to the east, air gas, and the Michoud plant. And there was a levee failure in the past in this area, and we're concerned about the maintenance of our flood protection system. The Paris parcel in particular is adjacent to a slated wetlands restoration under the federal Mistrigo restoration plan. In addition, filling wetlands behind flood protection is inconsistent with the state master plan, 2012, page 159. Basically, wetland areas inside the hurricane protection system need to remain intact and undeveloped, state master plan. We do not want construction of new hurricane protection systems, such as the barrier, to encourage unwise development in high-risk areas, as has occurred in the past. And state master plan passes. There's executive orders from the governor for all state agencies to remain consistent with the state master plan. Additionally, Orleans Parish has previously denied coastal use permits for similar developments, referring to local coastal use 2009-0490, April 20th, 2010. That permit for a port was denied. Relevant factors that were considered included flood and storm hazards, feasible alternative sites, drainage patterns, economics, public and private benefits, coastal water dependency, impacts on natural features, and it goes on. Basically, we can't afford more water on our levees, on our homes, or into our pumping system. Industrial zoning implies much too heavy of a footprint for these areas. We do have very low mitigation standards in the state of Louisiana, probably the lowest in the country.
That's your time.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Harvey Stern.
Thank you, Commissioners. Harvey Stern, New Orleans group of the Sierra Club. Scott Eustace pretty much said it concisely. We're talking about, between the two parcels at issue here, PD 1101 and PD 1102, we're talking almost 200 acres of open space. Many cities, including New Orleans, are spending substantial amounts of money to comply with resiliency requirements and stormwater retention requirements. Here we've got 200 acres of open space. By complying with the staff recommendations and leaving this as open space, basically denying this land use request, basically leaving this land alone, we are doing a significant amount towards stormwater retention for the reasons that Scott has mentioned. 200 acres of open space is significant. Unless there's a compelling reason to change it, which we haven't heard, let's leave 200 acres of open space, much of which is wetlands, in a place to do the job that it needs to do to comply with the city's resiliency plan, with the multiple barriers of defense plan. This property will serve that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all of the cards that I have for Planning District 11.
We had 1102 as well.
What's that?
read the other report for item B, 1102. It's also a port request on a different piece of property, 192 acres. The original staff designation was natural area. The request by the port is to change to industrial. The staff's recommendation on this is to change from natural area to planned development area, not industrial, for the same reasons as the previous piece of property.
Okay, Ms. Frankie, so your comments are now to B?
Yes.
Okay, you have 1 minute.
Okay. So the Parish property is a little different than the Aurora property in that it was designated as natural area. And the City Planning Commission staff put forth 28 amendments of their own that private owners, which included city and state agencies, should not have the ability, as I quote, it's not appropriate to designate privately owned property as parkland, which denies the owner any development right. We just asked the port be treated with the same deference as the city, state, and private owners. And I just want to note that neither of our properties have a wetlands declaration from the Environmental Protection Agency. When the site is developed, Port Nola will abide by all federal and state environmental regulations related to wetlands. We finally have a sustainable development division in our port with a large environmental department. We are a very well accredited environmental port. And the thing that I like about working with staff is they've recommended a modified approval of land use for planned development area, which means that they're seeing the wisdom of what we're asking for. However, it still allows for the same arbitrary application process for a developer to come in without the clear defined rules of industrial land use and maritime industrial zoning. So by putting in a clearly defined land use and zoning, it allows us to develop the property within our legislative mandate. And I think if you look at our letter that we submitted, there is a GIS map from the city's GIS that shows all of the natural areas property within Orleans District. And it is all either owned by mitigation banks or U.S. Fish and Wildlife. If the city had the intent of making this into a nature preserve, there was a way to go about it. This was not it. Taking the property and making it unusable is not appropriate.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff. If memory serves me correct, wasn't this before us before? And can you tell me the outcome of that? Was it rejected and not brought to council, or did it actually go to council?
Yes, this was before us before, and city planning staff recommended the planned development area for A, the Aurora site, and natural area for B, the Paris site. The council asked us to reconsider both of these, and then in the staff's reconsideration, we maintained our same recommendation on A, and on B, we have a different recommendation of planned development area. In the previous time, the commission supported both staff recommendations.
So I think PDA is a fantastic designation if we have jurisdiction. I think we had the same issue on the parks issue. Because the port is a state entity, can we talk about that, about what jurisdiction, what use of truck we have?
You have full jurisdiction.
What's the difference between this and the parks issue then?
Pretty straightforward.
So what the parks advocates were requesting was essentially a rewrite of our zoning ordinance and a rewrite of our master plan to pull accessory uses out as major and have them be standalone primary uses considered in that way.
Can we grab a different mic? I'm having trouble hearing you, Bob. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
What the in chapter 7, the issue was, and this is with respect to there is so the governing authority of both Audubon and City Park, and the extent to which they can use their property, and what we had suggested is that the issue of pulling out accessory uses from the primary use of recreational would essentially rewrite our ordinance with respect to accessory uses.
There was a discussion about whether or not we had jurisdiction to lay that into a state entity. What's the difference here?
I think the difference is that in that case, and we hear the same from both, I think we have a structure in place that comports with our regulations and a willingness to comport with the regulations.
In the master plan process with the parks?
In the master plan process, in the zoning process, in the site plan review process.
Okay.
They fully comply with stormwater and willingly do so, and so I think that's the issue. I think that, you know, all of the agencies kind of hold out that they are state agencies, and if they want to pull the trigger, they can sue us and get out from under these regulations, but we're advised that is not necessarily the case.
Okay.
Frankly, I'm surprised that over the many years or decades that this issue hasn't come up before, and maybe council is going to comment on whether...
There's actually a Louisiana Supreme Court case on point whereby state agencies do have to comply with our local zoning laws.
Thank you.
Okay, Planning District 11, we've heard, we've discussed. Is there a motion? I'm sorry? At this point, I'm sorry. We have to move forward. The reality is, okay, if we cannot, unless a commissioner has a question, this can't turn into a, because we have that's why we have the cards. That's why we have that system. And I know it can be frustrating, but that's why we have the system. So every point that's made cannot be countered at any time that there's a disagreement from the audience. As much as we want to hear every side, we simply can't every time that there's a disagreement based upon what someone says at the dais. Okay?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I have a question of the representative of the port.
Yes, please proceed.
Is that okay with you? I would, because I saw what seemed to be disagreement, and I've heard our counsel state, do you have a court case that is different, or, I mean, it's
The
not
court
just
case,
an opinion.
the court case that Ms. Beecher is referring to says that the state agency must adhere to the local city charter unless it impedes the mission of the state agency. It sets out, while the state agency lost the case, the Supreme Court laid out a very clear benchmark that it says if the zoning does not impede the mission of the state political subdivision, then it has to follow the zoning.
Specifically, how would this specific designation impede your mission?
The permitted uses that are within the planned development area differ greatly from the maritime industrial zoning, which is what all the rest of the city property, port-owned property within the city is zoned, because it suits all of the permitted uses that were in our legislative mandate. Further, the 60% open space requirement limits the ability greatly on these two properties to develop them. And again, there are other rules in place, both at the state, federal, and local level, that address stormwater management.
I have a question for staff. Is this Planning District 11, is it on deadline as well? Oh.
Are there any further questions?
The mission of the port is not necessarily to develop every site. It is to collect revenues that enhance the maritime climate, I would guess, of this region and of this state.
Our mission is to drive economic prosperity by maximizing the flow of waterborne commerce.
Right. So how does this, you kind of emphasize my point. It's kind of general. So how does this specific change impact your mission?
It means that the port has exclusive jurisdiction and control over our properties. While we don't have a developer for this property at this time, we are impeded from developing the property at this time.
But you're not impeded from soliciting developers.
But if they do their due diligence and they look at Property Viewer, which is an amazing tool, they're going to see what the zoning is, what the process is to go through a plan development application, and that there are many uses, such as being an alternative power generator, that would not be allowed on this site, or having a distribution center, or having a transloading facility, or a packaging facility. Many of those uses are not allowed on this site. These are all uses that are within our legislative mandate.
Or they could approach the proper authorities and request a land use change.
In up to 5 years, will the City Planning Commission reopen this application process again? So the city then sits, the property then sits there fallow again, waiting for another application process, and we might at that time have an applicant to come forward to develop this site. But if it's always going to be 5 years down the road before this is open, we're not guaranteed that we're going to have an interested party at that time. We've lost interested parties because they didn't want to wait and take the chance that this would happen.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further, are there any further questions from the commission? Okay, hearing none, I will ask for a motion. We have a recommendation from staff.
This is a challenging one, so I don't have the most.
You've never been afraid of challenges. Okay, we'll need a motion. If not, the matter will proceed with no recommendation. But we would need a motion. We need a motion. Even if it's for the purposes of further discussion.
Sir?
For the purpose of further discussion, I will make a motion, and I will make the motion that based on the port's ability to have the jurisdiction on these properties, and on behalf of the state has been mandated with maximizing their revenues. For purpose of this discussion, I will entertain the request to change the designation to industrial.
Motion by Commissioner Weedberg.
I'm going to second the motion so that we can get the discussion moving and try to move forward.
Are you on A only?
All right. Please clarify the extent of your motion.
Yeah, the extent of the motion was for A and B.
Okay. Do you support that with your second, Commissioner Hughes? Okay. Is there any further discussion on the motion at hand?
I'm really torn on this. I made the motion so that we could have a little discussion before we move on this. I think the PDA is actually a fantastic recommendation by staff. I think they did a good job. I hear the arguments from the port on an ability to maximize that, and that doesn't allow them to fully do that. I look at what we were asked to reconsider. My motion, I think this could go either way. My motion is in the place it's at because I do understand the intent behind the state mandates. I certainly don't want to impede that. That said, these are delicate properties, and I don't think a PDA would be wrong. But I said industrial to move this forward, so I welcome any other comments from the commission.
I previously recall we had a good lengthy discussion about this last time, and I would just say ask that of the representative from the port. were you able to necessarily talk with staff and kind of work it out? Because I understand the sensitivity of this situation necessarily for development on a sensitive piece of property, and the bind that it puts the port in necessarily finding someone to necessarily want to use the property. However, I think just opening it up for a blank industrial use could be cause problems in the future for City New Orleans. And I'm sensitive to that as a commissioner because we think about the best interest necessarily of all residents and not necessarily maybe the bind that it puts the port in.
Right. And, you know, I have the greatest respect for staff. I've worked with them for years. They're incredibly intelligent, and I appreciate the intent of what they're doing with trying to preserve a wetland. But again, this is not designated wetland. And at the end of the day, we have to pursue our mandate is what it comes down to. And staff did come around, and when the port made an application on this in 2011, the year after the master plan went into place, staff made a recommendation that the Paris property should not be natural area but should be planned development area. So they have come that far to meet with us, but there's still a very strong appreciation for sustainability within the City Planning Commission, which I very much appreciate, but we still have to balance it with the legislative needs of the two agencies. And like I said, we're going to exhaust our administrative process on these applications.
So the plan development designation necessarily wouldn't be useful in this case?
It's very limiting in the uses. If you compare the permitted uses list in maritime industrial with the permitted uses in the planned development area, they differ greatly. Planned development area is much more aimed towards residential and commercial use and not industrial uses. It does allow some very light, minimal industrial uses, but it does not allow the extent of maritime industrial that we do, which is a lot of transloading, packaging, things of that nature. We're hoping to get distribution centers locating here because of the jobs, and it's not just our jobs, it's the value-added jobs, the drayage jobs, the oil and gas jobs, and everything else that comes with it.
Excuse me, question from staff?
Not a question, I just wanted to respond, if I may. The range of uses for the planned development area just merely says industrial uses dependent on a formal planning process. The planned development area text itself is not what is limiting it to the uses being described in the comprehensive zoning ordinances.
So the previous developers that you had inquired about the property, necessarily what zoning would they require? The PD would
be nice
would
if
work?
we could do the zoning change right now as we're doing the land use change, because we don't want heavy industrial or light industrial. We want maritime industrial, which is very specifically tailored to the port and what we do. I understand what Mr. Kramer's saying, that it's broadly written, the planned development area in industrial uses, but that's the problem. It's broadly written. It's not defined. And to have zoning is to have defined things where people can look at a property and say, yes, I can do what I want here, or no, I cannot do what I want here. There are very few 100 and 200 acre parcels of industrial property within Orleans District. This is a great opportunity for revenue and jobs in our community. And we can do it in properties that are in other parishes, but that doesn't mean the money's here. And if we don't keep it within our jurisdiction, these distribution centers don't just go to Plaquemines or to Terrebonne. They're going over to Mobile and Biloxi or Savannah or Houston. We're a maritime use, not a commercial use.
All right, thank you. Are there any additional questions? Because I think we've exhausted this conversation thoroughly. We could probably go much longer.
Mr. Chair, I do want to add one thing. It's going to almost seem that I asked questions that didn't go in this direction, but I do want to also mention that it's in the New Orleans Regional Business Park, which is surrounded by industrial lands. So as we make a decision, I think that as planners, we want to have, and especially our staff, because they're so good, we want to be involved with a process which could create something that is an enhancement to not only that piece of land, but also the area in which it's located. In this case, New Orleans East, for example, or the Regional Business Park. But it is in the middle of the Regional Business Park, which is zoned for the most part industrial. And there's a reason for it, because it is a set-aside area where you can get some projects done that don't impede upon the neighborhoods around them per se, because they're located in that area. So with that said, I understand what staff's move is, but I also understand the port about having the designation that is necessary for them to market it, as is the surrounding area, for industrial purposes.
I'll just ask one question to staff. On the current motion that we have, if we made this change, are there any provisos or any additional language that would need to be added necessarily to the motion that you can foresee?
No, sir.
Can I ask for clarification of the motion?
Motion is for change going against staff recommendation for A and B and approving for industrial.
We have a motion.
And a second. Oh, no, I think it's been seconded already.
Yes. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Weedberg and a second by Commissioner Hughes. Is there any further discussion? If not, please vote your machines. Okay. 5 yeas, no nays. The motion passes. Thank you all. Okay. I just want to make an announcement, and I want to start off by apologizing. As you all know, we had to move this meeting up an hour for the purpose of trying to get through this very long docket. The master plan amendments were on deadline, so they had to go forward today. We are almost done with them. We are going to take 12 and 13. We're going to try to consolidate that to get through that as soon as we possibly can. But it's my understanding that I had a hard stop at 3. We're going to get through 12 and 13, but I do not believe we're going to get through to any of the new zoning matters today. And I sincerely apologize for that because we're going to lose a quorum. And again, I in no way did anyone on this commission want anybody to come and waste their time. So I am very sorry, and I just want to personally apologize that I do not believe we're going to get through the new zoning matters today. So can staff advise on if we don't get to those, which I don't believe we will, when those will be rescheduled?
Those would be
Noise.
rescheduled for the next meeting in October, which is on the 24th, 2 weeks from today.
Okay. Again, if you have a new zoning docket matter, we sincerely apologize, but we will not be able to hear it without a quorum.
And those will be old business at that point, so they'll go first? Yes. Correct. Okay.
So with that, we're going to move swiftly through Planning District 12 and 13, which is the Williams Amendment. So we're going to start. I have one card for Planning District 12. Carly Frankic.
Do you want to let staff read their recommendation first?
Well, I guess we probably need to do that. Thank you. Thank you for checking me.
Planning District 12, Item F. It was originally a request for a FLUM designation change from parkland, open space, industrial, mixed-use medium density to industrial on lots 1 through 12 plantation property. The original staff and CPC recommendations were denial of the FLUM designation change. The City Council motion asks the City Planning Commission to consider modifying the FLUM designation from parkland and open space, industrial, mixed-use medium density to industrial on lots 1 through 12 plantation property, or alternatively, considering modifying the FLUM designation from parkland and open space for only the portion of the site along the Batcher. Staff is recommending modified approval of the FLUM designation change for the portion of the property designated parkland and open space to mixed use, medium density. Approval of the FLUM designation change for the Batcher portion of the site from parkland and open space to industrial.
That's it? Okay,
Chair,
thank you.
Just to let you know, the remaining items of Planning District 12, the staff recommends maintaining the original CPC recommendations.
Thank you.
So just to reapprise, what was the first one you presented on that you recommended the change? That was D?
That's F.
F, thank
Yes.
you.
Okay. So this is the former Todd Shipyard, and the priority for the port is the batcher. The port controls a great deal of batcher in this area where we have existing tenants that have been there for over 100 years. So changing the FLUM to industrial with the zoning of maritime industrial will allow those tenants in that 100-year history to be a legal permitted use. And we appreciate the city planning commission's pragmatic approach to stepping down the land use from industrial to the surrounding neighborhoods. The surrounding neighborhoods have asked us repeatedly for first opportunity at the jobs at this site, and we have committed to doing a job fair as soon as we have a tenant identified. And what we're really pleased with staff is that they've revised their recommendation not just for the batcher but also the 2-acre southernmost parcel, which was a ball field adjacent to the Donsor Harrison Playground, which is currently leased to the city. And we've had several conversations with the city administration and the real estate department, and neither has wanted to enter into a new lease because of the expense of maintaining that ball field. So we've talked to Algiers Development District about their interest in maintaining the ball field, but they still have not committed to that either. So what staff has recommended is a change for that ball field to mixed-use medium density, which allows the ball field to be a permitted use if a new manager can be contracted, but it also allows the port to develop it in a step-down fashion going into the residential neighborhood.
Thank you.
We appreciate staff's revised recommendation.
Can
Thank you.
Can I make a motion on 12 to approve staff recommendations?
If we get a second, yes. If we get a second, do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion? Got a second from Commissioner Green. No discussion. Please vote your machines. Okay. And 13. Okay.
Williams.
13, Williams Amendment.
This request was originally submitted by Councilmember at Large Williams on behalf of Housing NOLA and several of their affordable housing partners. The